Welcome to Deal Nation. Today on the show, we're joined by Matt Viebrock, the founder of Let's Grow COO. This is going to be a phenomenal episode for anybody that is in the process of building, scaling, or struggling with the kind of structure of their organization in any way. Tune in. It's going to be a good one. Matt, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely looking forward to kind of getting into some of the solutions that you provide for real estate investors. I know that we're connected to quite a few people in the industry, and I know you've been really instrumental in their businesses. But before we get into that, I want to talk just a little bit about your journey and let people know kind of how you gravitated towards real estate investment and what led you up to the COO kind of drive.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey to get here. So going way back, growing up, I lived in the Midwest for the most part. I actually moved like 17 times since the time I was born. So got to see a lot of the country. And one of the things I always wanted to do when I was a kid was actually become a fighter pilot. And so I actually went to Texas A&M University. I had a two full ride scholarships, one for the Navy and one for the Air Force. Chose the Air Force route. Did that, and then about midway through my first year, I ended up finding I had a heart arrhythmia. So it was like, well, they have to roll you out of being in the Air Force because I can't do flying when you have something like that. So probably could have gone through the process to get some waivers and things like that. But I was like, I thinking about it. I want to have a family someday, and so like, what's my backup option? And I always had an interest in real estate. I had read Rich Dad Poor Dad just like everybody else, really early on. I think my aunt gave it to me when I was like 16. So I was lucky enough to kind of catch that entrepreneurial bug. So real estate was my second choice. And so after college and graduating from Texas A&M University, I went to go work for New Western Acquisitions, actually, as one of their disposition agents. Did that for a little bit of time. I was actually driving from North Austin to downtown San Antonio 6 days a week. And that's kind of how I cut my teeth. And that's a 95-mile journey one way. So you can kind of imagine. And I think, yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that. We actually, at Launch Control, we've got a great partnership with New Western where our investors can take the deals that they have in those 40 plus markets that New Western's in now and be able to dispo those deals through New Western. Yeah. And I don't know if you know Jimmy Quigg over there or not. He might predate him, but he's always talking about having these boots on the ground teams. And so to hear a story from you, like earlier days in New Western of driving from here to there and putting in the miles, like proof behind the boots on the ground thing,
Yeah,
so
it was interesting. I can't tell you how many fights I actually saw over people fighting over houses in the front yard. Because back in the day when I was there, so the acquisition guys, they would kind of package up the deals, and then they would tell us like the day before, hey, I'm going to be dropping this property tomorrow morning. You better be ready for it. Have all your investors, And we used to just make our investor list by going out and dropping bandit signs all over San Antonio and stuff like that, and just kind of creating our own buyer list. And then so I would kind of get them all ready to go, and then we'd all drive out to the same property, and there's like 5 of us dispo guys in the San Antonio office at the time. We're all heading over there with our buyers, and some of the guys just get into fist fights, so we're trying to buy the property. It's crazy, and then it was like a mad dash to who can get to the bank first to get their EMD check. So that was kind of the Wild West back in the day. But
that sounds like a ready-made reality TV series.
It was
HGTV gone wild.
It was. Seriously, I think HGTV probably would have done better following New Western guys than they would have done with some of these other shows. But no, I think I spent, like, I was one of the top sales guys, but I had a gas guzzler, and I think I spent all my commissions on gas just to get back and forth. But I'm grateful for the opportunity. It was a blast. And then shortly after that, I went to go work for a company called Lifestyles Unlimited. They teach real estate investing to newbies for the most part, but the goal is for people who usually have like self-directed IRAs, 401ks, things like that, to buy 10 to 15 properties, and then once they have enough equity, chunk those up into a multifamily syndication. So Lifestyles is still around today. I was their realtor, their sole realtor for Austin for a couple of years, and I was sourcing deals for investors, on the MLS and off market and stuff like that. I kick myself now because I drive by some of those houses. I'm like, damn, I wish I would have held on to some of those myself instead. But because we were selling them for 85 to 100,000, 115,000 at the time. And that same house now is worth like 400, $500,000. I'm like, yeah, so it's all right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy, man. Like I hear these equity. Obviously, I know the equity stories working with tons of investors across the country. But
Hmm.
one that really hit me recently. I was talking to my mom and dad, and they were
Yeah.
talking about the house that like I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
I mean, they were struggling, not struggling, but like they
Yeah.
weren't doing super well at the time. It was a very like starter kit house.
Hmm.
I won't say what it's worth now, but I was like slack jawed when they
Yeah.
told me what it goes for now. Oh my god,
Yeah.
should have kept that one as
Yeah.
a rental.
No, seriously. Yeah. So I got my license back in 2011, and did the realtor thing for a while. And then I got a call from a friend of mine who was like, hey, I know somebody who's looking for a transaction coordinator, and you're very much a systems kind of thinker. You've got, processes and things like that. And I was like, it was right up my alley. So I went to go work for a big team here in Austin, called the Heil Group, and did that from 2014 to 2015. And then my boss at the time approached me and was like, hey, you did a great job. You set up all these systems and everything like that for us, but now I can't afford to pay you what I'm paying you. So I got to bring in somebody cheaper to go do the same work that you set up for us. And he's like, why don't you go start a transaction coordination company? And so I did that, and ran that for about 8 years. And that was in 2022. And the whole time, I was running all that. I was, wholesaling and doing fix and flips, buying rentals and stuff like that on my own, just kind of on the side. Never really grew a huge operation, super big or anything like that of my own. But I always did it for other people. Right. So, for some reason, I just didn't have I don't know, the confidence maybe to go build my own business. I felt a little more comfortable working on somebody else's, but, but that's kind of been my specialty up to this point. And then, 2022, 2022, ended 2021, 2022, got hooked up with Eric Brewer and Steve
Mhm.
Trang. And my business partner at the time, we created the Brewer Method Innovation Training course with them. And I was one of Eric's partners in that. I basically became his COO with that as well, just running that particular company. And if you don't know who Eric is, he's a phenomenal individual and probably one of the best big time investors that's out there right now. So shout out to Eric. Um, but he and I trained a little over 400 investors over about a 2.5 year period. And then it was kind of interesting because one of the things I noticed so much about all the weekly calls that I was running for that coaching group was it was hardly ever around questions around innovations. It was always around like something with operations and finances and hiring and firing and all that other kind of stuff. And so it was becoming such a need that I saw that I was like, man, nobody's really helping real estate entrepreneurs to figure all this stuff out, right? And they get so burned out with all this kind of stuff. And so that's when Let's Grow COO was born, and sold my shares in the company back to Eric and just went full head on into this. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And it's been a ride. So a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. I love that. Don't get mad at me if I title this episode "From Fistfights to Innovations to Let's Grow," but
There you go. I love it. That's awesome.
No, but I love it's a great story and a really interesting breadth of experience within the real estate investment industry. You've done a lot, and what you've landed on with Let's Grow COO, I think is a really great it's a really great business model because I what you experience working with Eric Brewer and the people that are coming in and the things that outside of novations, the things that they were having trouble with were those organizational, structural. How do I essentially take what is like a big corporate entity and shrink it down to my SMB sized business? Because
Hmm.
it's not the sweet spot for most investors, right? For most
Yeah.
investors, the sweet spot is talking to sellers and working deals and looking for the best possible margins, but not
Yeah.
necessarily building an organizational structure. And so anytime that I travel nationally and I go to the big masterminds and I sit at a round table with the investors, that is always the primary challenge that people are
Hmm.
facing. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely a gap in the market. So,
Yeah.
with that in mind, what are some of the things that you're doing with the investors that you're working with in the real estate space?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that we do. So obviously we can actually be your COO. So and let me break down kind of like the definition of what a COO really does, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's
and
a good idea.
I've been a COO and a director. So there's COOs and there's director of operations, and then you got like operations managers, and you got all the people that kind of work underneath them, right? A COO at the highest level is really somebody who takes the owner's strategy, the visionary strategy that they, or the ideas and the things that they want to kind of come up with, take that vision and then create a strategy around that, and then make sure the right butts are in the right seats, and that the people that are on the bus now are actually all rowing kind of in the same direction. So that way, and holding them all accountable, right? They're not necessarily doing the work of being in the trenches, like actually physically working on everything, but really holding everybody to that high standard and making sure, and really being the driver of the revenue is kind of the way I see like a COO, because, you know, visionaries, you know, we have a tendency to, you know, and I'm kind of one of those hybrids. I'm a visionary and integrator kind of mix. It's kind of weird. So if you look at my PI, I'm a strategist. And if you look at my disc profile, I'm a high D and high C, which is really rare. But that's kind of what you need when you're working with a COO. And so with that, the strategy, or so visionaries are really good about coming up with all these crazy ideas and stuff like that, but they need almost like a filter to really figure out, okay, what's the most important things we need to be working on right now, right? Because not all these ideas are always great. You know what I mean? So that's really what we're there to do. Then there's full on fractional COO work where we're actually working in the business day to day. You know, we are handling everything for them, and running the entire team, right? So that's one of the things that we can do. That's really more for like our higher level clients, you know, doing 5 million a year plus typically in revenue. And then the next step down from that is really more we call fractional COO consulting, where we come in for anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week. We are kind of taking all those things we were talking about, you know, basically taking that vision, creating that strategy, and then making sure those people are being held accountable, and then just making sure that, now you as the visionary, you need to go and focus on really three things. It's, you need to focus on hiring the right people and making sure you've got all the right butts in the right seats, and then working on your culture is super important as the CEO of the
Hmm.
company, and then really being super dialed in on your numbers, right? So most investors, and entrepreneurs just don't know their numbers, and if you don't know your numbers, you don't really have a business. You got more of a hobby, right? So that's kind of what I
Yeah.
like to.
So I think there's an important clarification to make, because there's a couple of fractional roles that people consider, and
Hmm.
especially if they're scaling up, but they're quite different in what they actually do. I mean, every
Yeah.
business obviously is focused on profitability, right? It's that
Hmm.
how much is that business actually earning? How much cash flow are you bringing in? But uh, the fractional roles that people often would consider are a COO, Chief Operational
Hmm.
Officer, and then a CFO. And so, what
Hmm.
would you see as sort of the key differentiators between what a COO does and
Yeah.
a CFO?
Yeah. So the CFO is really gonna. So this the CEO comes up with the vision, right? And
Mhm.
for where they want the company to be, what they want the culture to look like, and then they give that to the COO to then come up with, okay, well, what's the strategy we need to do, and actually in order to hit that vision and come up with what those goals and the KPIs and everything it needs to look like, right? From
Yeah.
there, the COO and the CFO need to work together to say, okay, based on where we're currently at from a financial picture, where we stand right now, and then what do we have to do in order to properly manage the cash flow in order to get to that next level, right? And make those strategic decisions together. So a CFO and COO really have to kind of go hand in hand. And I get that question a lot, so I appreciate you asking it. Because a COO, we don't necessarily do the financial piece. We understand it at a very high level, right? But we don't aren't actually, but we're not at the same levels like what a CFO is, right? To really understand, okay, so if you do X number of flips right now, right, what's your cash conversion cycle going to look like in the next 9 months, and are you going to run out of cash before then? That's not something I'm going to, you know, try to figure out for you. That's what they're going to do, right? I'm
Yeah.
going to figure out, okay, taking what the financial picture is that the CFO came up with, and now I'm going to say, okay, based on what we can afford to do, here's how I'm going to prioritize the next steps and getting the right people on the bus to make sure that we can hit those goals that we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often think of it as being like the conductor of a symphony, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
not necessarily writing the music, but you're pointing and you're conducting, and
Yeah.
you're getting the music to come to life, right? So
100%.
the
Yep.
the the visionaries, and I think most people that are everybody that gets into real estate investment has somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they would just be working for someone else. And
Yep.
and though the bigger the companies get, when you start really having those great ideas for growth and expansion, you don't have the time to build
Mm-hmm.
processes for all of that, right? Like your
Correct.
time is more valuable in other areas, other profit driven areas. So if you can have a right hand person to really set up those processes and make sure that, if you step away for a couple of weeks, profit's still coming in, the systems are still
Yep.
working, everybody knows their role. Like that's it. It basically allows them to be visionaries without being micromanagers, and
100%.
the ability to not be a micromanager is honestly worth
Yeah,
millions
it
for
is.
the bigger investors.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because so much of what we do before we have these different systems and procedures and things like that in place is we do a lot of transactional leadership, which is like I just tell you what to do, you go do it kind of thing. And there's not a lot of accountability that's kind of around that. So we really want to focus on transformational leadership, right? Is getting people to think critically for themselves, and then and kind of how we start the whole process with any client that we work with is we have what's called our freedom focus or methodology that we use, right? So it all starts off with, and I know this sounds super basic, but it's sometimes the simplest things are the best things, is to start off with a 14-day time study, right? It's literally
Mhm.
you from the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed, every 15 minutes, you're writing down everything that you do, right? And it really helps bring a lot of clarity around like how are you actually spending your time, because so many investors that we work with are just like they think they're doing a lot of stuff and putting a lot of effort in their business, but they're really just spinning their wheels, right? Doing stuff that's not producing the revenue that they really need to do, right? So you think your work just because you're working on your website, that's not a revenue generating activity. Like, so let's focus on the higher dollar per hour value task, right? So what we do is we do a 14-day time study with them, and then we break that down. We do what's called an energy audit, right? So you probably heard of something like this kind of before. And we rank them on a 1, 2, 3, or 4. One's being like, this is where it's my genius zone, I love to do it. 4 being like, hey, I hate doing it and I suck at it. Like that's, you need to delegate that kind of stuff off, right? So, and the
Mhm.
goal is we basically will then assign a dollar per hour value to each one of those tasks. And we have a spreadsheet that does all this, and I'll give it away to you, to your team or to any of your listeners for free, so they can kind of
Oh,
do it
that's great.
themselves, with like a walkthrough video and everything like that, how to work it. But and then the nice part is like once you know where all these things at, it's like really like holy cow, it puts a dollar per hour value to each one of these things. It's like most investors when they see it, they're like, I didn't realize I was only making like $12 an hour, or something like that. It's like I could have
Yeah.
been working at McDonald's for for all this effort that I'm putting into it, right? So it really comes down to identifying what you're working on, and then figuring out what gives you the most energy and lights you up the most, and then what makes you the most money, and let's go focus on doing more of those things, right? And the nice thing is like once you're done with that exercise, you can literally just take copy and paste the things that are 3s and 4s and move them over to a delegation list, right? And then that's where we step in as the COO, and we start to prioritize all those different things that basically say, okay, what's the 80-20, the 80-20 principle? 20% of what your efforts are going to produce 80% of your results. Let's focus on
Mhm.
prioritizing it based on that, and then we start knocking out the SOPs for it and putting the right butts in the right seats to make it happen. So it's
Yeah, I
pretty
mean,
simple.
we talk about the same kind of things with subscribers at Launch Control, just on a much more macro level, not on that like
Hmm.
practical day to day. Here's how you
Yeah.
improve on a company level, but on a
Hmm.
macro level to get investors thinking about that same thing, because it's human nature to checklist things, right? To like,
Hmm.
well, I checked my email and then I posted something on social and
Yeah.
I made some cold calls and and it feels like forward momentum, but like you said, it's really kind of spinning your wheels. So we'll
Hmm.
we'll frame things for our subscribers and say, like, imagine a situation in which you're using our done for you texting on the front end. So we're doing all of the text engagement for you via launch leads, and
Hmm.
I'm doing a warm handoff for sellers who are ready to have a conversation about their home. And then you plug into some of our dispo solutions on the back end, or even connect with some of our transaction. You mentioned transaction coordination with our transaction coordination partners to save
Hmm.
yourself that time there. So there's really that center kind of circle
Yeah.
where you're really focused on solutions with sellers, and your
Hmm.
per hour value in there, if like you take a national average on on a wholesale deal of say like 20K, is
Mm-hmm.
it you're gonna end up making something like $5,000 to $8,000 per hour, which
It's ridiculous.
sounds it sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous, but it's achievable,
Oh,
right? With
100%.
the right
Yeah.
systems.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, and that's what that freedom focuser methodology with that calculator will show you exactly what that is, right? I mean, when we broke down the math, I mean, if you work 40 hours a week on a, for 5 days a week, roughly you're looking at about 2,088 hours, per year that you have to work. So if you want to make $1,040,000, you have to make $500 an hour, right? So
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do to make $1,000,000 a year, you have to be focused on those $500 an hour tasks. Otherwise, you're just never going to get there, right?
Yeah.
So, and you as the visionary and the owner right now, while you're doing less than $1,000,000 a year, you have to be that person who's actually on the phone working with those sellers until you can start to delegate some of those things off to then buy back your time and then go and hire. The first hire I typically say to make is like, if you're doing less than 300,000 a year, hire a virtual assistant, like a general VA, right? And I've got some great resources for that. But once you're hitting at least 300,000 a year, now we want to start doing things like getting somebody who's local to you, who is US based, who can not only just be your executive assistant from the business perspective, but we also train them on how to become a personal assistant for you as well, right? So take dry cleaning, take your dog to the doggy daycare, whatever it may be, right? I mean, little things like this time starts to add up. And so the more you can hand off, the better to then focus on those higher dollar per hour activities. Then once you've gotten to, you're getting a little bit close to that $1,000,000 range, we say, okay, now let's go start bringing in a marketing person who can help to really
Mhm.
dial in that marketing strategy and then really start ramping up those leads. And then once you've got, typically about 150 to 200 leads a month coming in at that point, now you're ready to hire an acquisition person, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the methodology we typically follow. So,
Do you guys provide any guidance in terms of retention strategies or kind of promotion growth strategies so that people
mhm.
within that organizational structure stick around?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a big thing. So especially for like salespeople, running a lot of contests and things like that. I think more often than not, though, the bigger issue is that a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs will get, they'll bring people onto their team, and they think, oh, I'm just going to tell them go do this, and then they think they're delegating, but they're not actually delegating. They're just abdicating that responsibility to somebody else, and they're not checking up
Mhm.
on it. Right? There's a big difference between delegation and abdication, right?
Yeah.
Delegation is I'm going to tell you go do this, right? But then I'm going to follow back up with you on it, and then we're going to say, okay, did we accomplish all the things on the goals that we set on the timeline we set to do it, right? That's true delegation. So abdication is just say go do it, and then it's now your job, and I'm not gonna have anything to do with it. And that's where a lot of guys get in trouble. And so one of the ways to kind of help combat that is making sure people feel valued is to really set up like at least a bi-weekly, I would say one-on-one meeting with the people that they
Mhm.
have, and not just focus on the business's goals, but and what their role is in the business, but then also focusing on them as a person, right? So there's a book that I read recently called The Dream Manager by, I think it's Matthew
Mhm.
Kelly, and it's probably one of the best books I've read all year. And he talks about like if you can focus on doing nothing but focus on getting your people what they want, then they will give you everything you ever wanted more, right? So, and he talks about different strategies to do all that. So, and we implement a lot of that with the coaching that we do with our clients as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's, it getting to the point where, especially if you're getting past just having, a virtual assistant, which is everybody's first plug-in for
Hmm.
growing the business, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
after that, like speaking of the value of your time and wanting to hit that metric of at least $500 per hour that you're earning
Hmm.
on any company, whether it's in real estate or otherwise, right? Losing people and then having to rehire and retrain is an absolute profitability killer, right? For
Oh,
the
it's
business
yeah.
and for
Yeah.
you. So yeah.
Yeah, over depending on the position, I think it was a Harvard Business Day review I read recently. It talks about this specific thing was that if whenever you lose somebody, the turnover costs alone, like for just like an example, like an executive assistant, minimum you're looking at 30% of whatever you would typically pay them on a yearly basis. That's what's going to cost you, right? But if you lose
Yeah.
like one of your top sales guys or something like that, it can be upwards of 100 to 200% of whatever they were making in revenue for your company is lost opportunity, right? And that's a
Yeah.
huge deal. So really focusing, and that's why, reading Trey Taylor's book, a CEO only does three things, is crucial. It's, again, focusing on the right people on the seat, right people in the right seats, focusing on the building that culture and the numbers, right? Like, that's really what a visionary should be only focused on once you get to that higher level, right?
Yeah.
So if you start off building the foundation correctly, where you're focusing on doing, pouring into your people and not doing just that transactional leadership, but the transformational leadership piece of it, you're going to have people who stick around a lot longer, right?
Um, Within the launch control, well, the Deal Nation audience, right? The Deal Nation
Mm-hmm.
audience is probably, I'd say, maybe, a third of the audience is really just getting started in real
Mm-hmm.
estate, right? So they're, let's say 8 to 10 months away from hiring a VA. They got to get some
Mm-hmm.
deals under the belt, right?
Yep.
So for someone who's an early stage entrepreneur and they want to get to that stage, right? They obviously don't want to have to learn all of the organizational tactics and tools when they're already big. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of these simple steps that people can take to get organized and to have a bit of a scalable structure before they get
Mm-hmm.
to the point where they'd work with Let's Grow?
Yeah. So one of the things, and I would first start off by buying the book "Buy Back Your Time" by Dan Martell. So
Mhm.
so many of the principles that we train on with our coaching come from that book. I mean, there's a lot of other people who train on that kind of stuff too, like, Trevor Mock from Carrot, has his freedom formula. All of it's the same stuff that we're basically talking about. Just the problem is, like, how do you go and implement it, right? So one of the easiest things to do, and that Dan talks about in that book, is what he calls his camcorder method, right? So camcorders, for those of, like, it kind of dates me, I guess, a little bit, but so one of the easiest things to do, though, is if you have a whole bunch of stuff you're doing, like we tell our clients all the time, if you're doing something more than once, you should get something like Loom. So Loom, or if you have like a Mac, you can even just do like a screen record type of thing. I love Loom because it has an AI feature built into it as well, where it actually will start to write out SOPs for you now, which is another cool thing.
Yeah.
But you just, anytime you do something more than once, you just click record on it. And then another freebie I can give away to your audience as well, which is part of that Freedom Focuser template that we have, is there's an SOP framework like that we have that's built into it. So there's 5 steps that we do. So you have the time study, you have writing down all the tasks that you're doing and assigning your energy audits and your dollar per hour to that, for like everything you're currently doing. Then step 3 is you move that over to, here's the only task that I want to keep. Step 4 is, here's my delegation list. Step 5 is, now everything that's on that delegation list, I've got an SOP spreadsheet that I can say, okay, I'm going to focus on this one. And then we do what's called the RACI method. It's like, who's going to be responsible for it? And right now it might be me because I'm the only person, in the company, but I'm responsible for it. I'm accountable to it. I consult myself and I have to inform, myself on this. But eventually, over time, who's the person that's actually going to have to do each one of these things? And then you just
Mhm.
record that video, put it on that spreadsheet. And then when you bring somebody on, like your virtual assistant, let them organize all that stuff for you and let them write the SOPs, right?
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to do any of the writing aspect of it, but it makes it a lot simpler just to hit the record button, save it someplace, and then let your VA come in and let them write all this stuff out for you. Super easy.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And then, I think one of the things, and like your opinion on this, of course, but one of the things to look into at that early stage is, you know, a- outsource if you can, right? Or maybe even
Hmm.
outsource before you hire. You don't
Yeah.
have to build a 10-person team if
Hmm.
there are plug and play resources that can at least until you're ready to scale up to that size can do those things for you.
Yeah, 100%. And so that's why, like, on that Freedom Focuser, it's really important too, because it'll tell you on there like what your buyback rate is. So,
Hmm.
and with the buyback rate is like, okay, if I'm making, $100 an hour, right, then I can essentially afford to pay $20 an hour to somebody else, so I can get a 5x return on my dollar per hour value, right? So it'll tell you what that is. One of the very first things I would absolutely do if you're just getting started off is outsource transaction coordination, right? It's one of the easiest
Yeah.
things to outsource. And one of the things that we train our investors to do is, like, on our assignment agreement that we have that my attorney built for us, is there's a specific part on there that says, here's the transaction coordinator's name, here's their email, phone number, address, all that kind of stuff. And the buyer is responsible for paying for whatever that fee is going to be, right? So I don't care if you work with like David Old's Easy RAI closings or Casey Smith's Atlas TC's transaction solutions. Like just charge 650, 800 bucks, whatever it is, and then pay that person like that outsourced TC. That alone. So like we did a study when I had my TC company, how long it took us to manage one transaction from start to finish. Now, granted, this was on more of like the retail realtor side of things, but the same principles still apply. There's a lot of overlap, but it was anywhere between 8 to 10 hours per transaction that it took us to manage everything from start to finish and do it well, right? Well,
Yeah.
if you're not good at understanding title issues and how the escrow process works and all that kind of stuff, one, you're going to suck at it. And it's not the title company's job, by the way, to clear all those things off of the title commitment. That's yours to work with the seller on, right? So if you're
Yeah.
not any good at that, outsource to somebody else. There's no reason for you to be doing that kind of stuff just to save a little bit of money.
Yeah.
So
What was the phrase used before? Like your zone of genius or
yeah, zone of
your
genius.
right. So it's like knowing your zone of genius, right? Like
Hmm.
personally, right? If I wanted to just go all in on an investment business,
Yep.
I want to sit in the seat for sales and marketing because
Hmm.
I know sales and marketing. That's my entire career background, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
going to say, get out of the seat, let me sit down, let me do it.
Yeah.
Transaction coordination, I'm going to get up and be like, you want the seat? Take it. 'Cause I
Yeah.
don't want to deal with that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not what I'm good at. It's not where I have the experience in. So
Yeah.
like knowing that, because it could be the reverse, right? Like you could love the transaction coordination side. That could be super easy for you. And you
Hmm.
might not want to deal with sending text messages through launch control. You might not want to come
Hmm.
up with the messaging. You might want to even you might not even be great on seller calls. You might need someone to help you with that.
Yeah.
But you understand the full scale of the business and you
Yeah.
really want to work on like the dispo transaction side, then know that and
Hmm.
find the roles to fill in the places that are outside of your zone of genius.
Oh, 100%. And one of the things I did when I got started initially too is like there were certain things I just did not enjoy doing. Like I can talk to sellers, I'm decent at it. Like I've closed hundreds of deals, but do I enjoy it? No. Am I the greatest at it? No. But I would JV with people all the time and be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, can you help me out with this one? And I'll do the dispo side. You do the acquisition, talk to the seller, close them up, kind of thing." And that's how we would do deals sometimes, right? Find out what you're really good at, and then lean into that, and then lean into the different communities that you're in. I mean, Launch Control's got a great community. There's a ton of different other ones that are out there as well, and there are tons and tons of experienced investors who would be more than happy to partner up with you on doing these deals. Like even myself, like if you can find somebody even who is a more experienced investor and you don't have a lot necessarily to bring to the table right now, if you bring a deal to them and you're like, hey, I'm willing to do all the work, right? You just tell me what I got to do, I'll go do it, kind of situation. Like for me, whenever I JV with people now, it sounds like, hey, I'll teach you everything I know during this process, and I'll just take 25% of the gross profit on the deal. But the minute I have to get involved with it's a seller, title company, buyer, whatever, then it goes 50-50. But 50% of a deal is better than 50% of a watermelon is better than 100% of a grape, right? So that's kind of what
Yeah.
we like to say. So
I'm glad that you the couple things I want to touch on that you just mentioned. What one is, the real estate investment niche or the real estate investment space is a really close knit kind of thing, right? Where
hmm.
don't start with Google. If you need to make connections, don't start with Google. Start
Hmm.
with the communities that you're in. Go to Launch
Hmm.
Control. Go to your CS, your customer success rep at Launch Control, and say, "Hey, I need solutions around transaction coordination." Right? But
Hmm.
we'll connect you with someone like David Olds, and
Hmm.
and and make sure that you have that consult that you need, or if you need data services or you need whatever, like
Hmm.
it's you can go to either the service providers that you're working with and tap into their networks, or
Yeah.
in the case of the other thing I wanted to mention was JVing deals. Not having that lone wolf mentality and actually like leaning on the expertise of others is you don't always need the whole piece of pie or the whole watermelon or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you get 10 little bites here and there,
Yeah.
and it starts to really add up. So
Yeah.
it's a good a couple of good things to keep in mind, right? Like
Yeah.
don't go it alone and don't figure it out alone. Lean on community because this is a really great community. you know?
Yeah, I've worked in other industries before, and I've never been in another one where there was this much collaboration and openness and honestness to, honestly, to share all the different best practices that people are having. You don't get that in most other industries. I mean, everybody looks at you just like as a competitor, and it's like they kind of keep all their cards close to the vest a little bit. I mean, lean into that, right? That's a huge
Yeah.
advantage that you have when you're starting out, for sure. I agree.
Which is funny to say, given that we started this conversation with fistfights on the lawn out in Austin, but
Yeah,
it's true, right?
it
Like
is.
there are
Yeah.
millions of dollars being done
Yeah.
in JV deals literally every day, and
Mhm.
it's just finding the right network and being able to tap into new buyers and maybe working with realtors that you didn't have a relationship with. There's tons of ways to get a
Yeah.
smaller but still significant slice of the pie.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So who are like what's your kind of avatar starting point for someone to come to you, right? Is it I'm
Yeah.
guessing there's like a Goldilocks thing where it's too soon, it's already too late.
Yeah.
What's kind of the just right point
Yeah.
to come work with you guys?
Yeah. So, like I was mentioning before, is if you're doing less than, I'd say, 250 to 300,000 a year, focus on, you can do at least that much, if not more, with just yourself and a virtual assistant and outsourcing transaction coordination, right? You don't need much more than that.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Focus on getting your marketing dialed in, and focus on getting talking to as many sellers and make as many offers as you can. Like, that's really it, right? When you get to that point, now once you've made that kind of income, revenue level, now it's time to start looking at, okay, how can I delegate more of these things off my plate that I'm doing on a daily basis. And I one other piece I would add to that is, if you're doing anything less, I would start off immediately with getting somebody else to manage your books. That's something
Yeah.
else that's super crucial. So getting at least a part-time bookkeeper, it's actually pretty cheap. Once you start closing more than about 1 to 2 deals a month, it's time to get a bookkeeper, bring them on, then outsource TC, get a virtual assistant, you're off to the races. I know guys who
Mhm.
are doing close to $1 million a year, and that's their entire business, is like that's all they've got,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So you can do it. I've seen it done. But if you're like me, like, I don't want to have to do all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of I like my personal time, and I don't want to have to work 50, 60 hours a week. I want to work about 20. At
Yeah.
that point, that's when I would just want to focus on those higher level tasks. Now it's time to start looking to bring us on when you hit about that 250, 300 a year mark. And then we can really help you kind of scale it responsibly from there, because there's a big difference between scaling and growth, right? Growth is very linear in terms of, like, a lot of times when you're growing your revenue, your expenses are also kind of going up at the same time, right? Scale happens over a longer period of time, and you might be kind of stagnant like this, but then all of a sudden, after a couple of years, you have that hockey stick kind of growth. But ideally, you're having that growth, but your expenses are kind of, only marginally going up over time, is kind of what we try to shoot for. And so
Sure.
that's where a lot of that strategy kind of comes into place. And so, yeah, to scale it responsibly, that's when you bring us in about 250, 300.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's working in the we talked about the COO versus CFO
Mhm.
distinction, but both people focusing on both get hit with the same problem from big
Mhm.
investors, which is that they've got seven-figure businesses, but not seven-figure profitability, right? Like they're
Yeah,
doing hundreds of transactions,
yeah,
but because the expenses keep creeping up,
yeah,
the profit margins aren't increasing, and that's
yeah.
that's a it's a fixable problem, but it's a
Oh,
common problem.
it's a very fixable problem, and that's something else too that I would highly recommend, is if you don't know how to read a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet, and you're doing under 250,000 a year, you better learn that now, because when you start to get to that level, it's going to be super, super important. Because one of the first things we do when we bring on a client is, do you have the bookkeeping in place? Show us your P&L, show us your balance sheet and your cash flow statement. We want to see all those things, because that's going to tell us the health of your business where you're at currently, right? Well, I can
Yeah,
look at that, but then I could be like, okay, you need now a CFO or whatever it might be, or there's just some tweaks we need to make here. So we automatically go on the defense. What are the expenses that we cut right now that that aren't super necessary? And then we start to come up with that plan of, like, okay, well, we know we need to get to 50 deals this next year. Like, what are those expenses that we need to do, and what are the KPIs that we need to have in order to do that? But it all starts with the P&L, right, in the balance
Yeah.
sheet. So understanding those numbers is going to be crucial.
I'm wondering if you have a couple use cases we could talk through. So
Yeah.
you brought up, and I'm glad you brought this up. You brought up, like, for you, kind of the happy space is about 20 hours a week or so, right?
Hmm.
And because there are a lot of people that get into real estate investment for lifestyle businesses, right? Not
Hmm.
necessarily to build generational wealth. And then on the flip side, there are those that they want to run and gun and they want to make as much money as they can. And, you know, they want to be paced more than me. You know, they want to
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
they want to hit that upper echelon.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I know that part of what you guys are doing is in that evaluation process, saying like, look, this is where you obviously want to be. So let's
Hmm.
chase that, right?
Hmm.
Can you maybe give a couple of use cases of like companies you've worked with where you've seen that reduction of expenses and then that big spike in scalability, and then
Hmm.
maybe even one where like somebody just said, look, I want to get to 500,000 a year and I don't want to work more than 15, 20 hours a week, and how you're able to help execute on those.
Yeah. So one of our clients that we work with, I won't talk names, but I'll at
Of
least
course.
kind of give you general ideas of like what they did. So we started working with another one guy about, what was it, September, I think, of last year. When we took a look at he didn't have a P&L, didn't have a balance sheet, anything like that. We finally got somebody in there to clean up his books and stuff like that. And it turns out like the year before, he was a fix and flipper. Like that's all he did was a fix and flip, primarily just a one-man operation. And he's like, he thought he was making about 300,000 a year roughly in terms of revenue. It turned out he was actually negative 277,000 in net profit.
Wow.
And he had
Yeah.
no idea. And he was just like, funding it himself. Well, over the course of the last year or so, we turned that around from being negative 277 in net profit. And I don't care about revenue numbers. Revenue is a vanity metric as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. Net profit's really the number I really want to focus on, right? So we took
Absolutely.
him from going negative 277 to this year he'll be a little under a million in net profit that he's going to make, close to about 800,000. So,
Wow.
and it's just by putting just some, we cut back on so much stuff initially, right? And got the books figured out, got all that cleaned up. He hadn't done tax returns probably for 3 years or something like that either. And so we had to get all that stuff cleaned up too. And then once we had all that in place, it's like, okay, now what's the plan? What are we going to do? Right. So it's like, we figured out, okay, well, your cash conversion cycle, part of the reason why you're having these problems is because you're going through these roller coaster dip effects where you have all these flips that you bought, you're working on 5 at a time, and then you're not doing any of the marketing and stuff like that continuously. And so you got this feast or famine kind of approach. And we see that happen all the time, right, with a lot of investors. And so it's like, okay, well, let's start to even out that, that roller coaster a little bit and do some more wholesaling and, novations and things like that. And so, and he's in New York State, which New York State's a tough market to do deals in, just because it's an attorney state. But I mean, some of his biggest rips were twice the size of some of the flips he was doing, right, on wholesales. So it's like just kind of evening those things out made a huge difference for him, right? Um, I think one of the biggest keys that a lot of people don't focus on though is like what you kind of mentioned, which was figuring out exactly what kind of person are you and what do you want your business to look like. And you need to have a vivid vision for what you want that to be in the next
Mhm.
1, 3, 5, 10 years. Right. And
Yep.
does that really resonate with you as a person and with your family life that you have and all that kind of stuff? Because I had another client who, he was primarily doing virtual investing, and he had just started off. He'd only been doing it for like 9 months, and had very quickly gotten himself up. It was him and a lead manager. That was it. And he quickly got himself up to about 500,000 a year in revenue within 9 months. It was very, very fast.
Wow.
And he's just a killer closer on the phone, but he sucked at everything else.
Yeah.
But he's like, he thought, like, and what part of the process that we go through is really helping to identify, do what are your overall goals? What do do you really want to have that huge business? Like, we go through the 5 whys kind of exercise, right? Tell me why this. Okay, well, why do you want that? Well, then why do you want that? And so on and so forth, to really nail down what it is. And he initially thought he wanted to be like a Pace Morby, right? And have a huge community and all that kind of stuff. And he turns out he just wants to be a surfer dude. And so he moved out to San Diego, and now it's just him and a small team, and they're cranking away, and they'll do probably 1.5 million, 2 million, possibly in 2025, kind of the way we're showing what they're looking at right now. So, and
Amazing.
yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things. But to kind of go back to what you were saying was culture is so important. I think it's probably the most important thing. If I had to put a pin to like what's the most important thing in anybody's business, is defining what culture you really want, and then making sure you are just going all in on driving that. And if there's somebody who doesn't align with you in any way on your team, they could eventually become a cancer, and you are going to want to remove that, right? So that's
Yeah.
something that that was, I think, probably the number one reason for the guy in New York. His success was that we found people for him who were just a perfect cultural fit for him. And now all the guys that are on his team, I mean, they're just cranking away, and everybody's loving life and showing up, and they're working in their genius zone, since now he's working in his genius zone only. And he's so much happier than where he was before, and that's really what we're trying to accomplish more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's ever gone through the hiring process in any business knows how limited a
Yeah.
resume is.
Oh
Right? Because you
gosh.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, you can look at an amazing resume and the
Yeah.
person is just a total misfire.
Oh
And then
yeah.
you can look at another resume that looks like they don't have the experience and they come in and you're like, oh, this, like, I definitely want this person around my team Monday through Friday. This person's a
Yeah.
perfect fit. Where they have gaps, we'll teach them. This is great,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it it sucks when your resume doesn't fit, but you know you would be a fit. And it also sucks
Hmm.
when you're looking at resumes and going through it. But it's true. Like it's important. Like it's a relationship, right? Like
Oh yeah. Yeah.
even if you're working in that business 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week, and a more of a lifestyle business, you are still in a sense in a relationship with everybody that you work with, and you need to
Yeah.
be able to. You want to be with the surrounded by the right people and surround the people you're with the right people.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think that the one of the biggest testaments to that specifically was before I got into real estate investing. I was doing the realtor side of it more than anything else. I worked at Keller Williams for a long time, and
Hmm.
being in Austin with Keller Williams, that's where the headquarters is at. So I was very fortunate to go sit in on a lot of mastermind sessions that Gary Keller, the founder, who's now a billionaire, taught.
Yeah,
And that was one of the things he talked about, was like being super slow to hire but quick to fire, right? And
yeah,
so, and in fact, it was really interesting. He's like, he took, what was it? I think he said he took like 6 months to hire like his first employee, which who then actually became the COO, or sorry, the CEO of Keller Williams.
yeah.
I think it was Mo Anderson. I think was one of his first ones, and so, and she's an amazing person too. I got to have the opportunity to meet her, but he took a long time to really get to know her and make sure that she was the right person. She was with him for over 30 years, to
Oh
grow that
wow.
business. So, and that's really what you're shooting for, is you want to have that longevity, because to what you said earlier, the cost of turnover is incredibly high, right?
Yeah,
So, and part of that again goes back to everything circling back. Go read that book, The Dream Manager, and it talks about, again, the cost of turnover and how to reduce that is by focusing on your people, right? So
yeah,
we brought it all for full circle here a little bit, but yeah, hiring super important. Resumes don't tell a lot. Our hiring process is, I think, 13 steps long is what we have on it.
oh wow.
12 for sales, 13 for admin assistants and things like in other positions in the company. But it takes, to find a rock star, I mean, it's going to take you probably at least 2 to 3 months minimum to find a really good person.
Yeah,
Um, and one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is that I tell people, like, I'm not going to work with you until I've worked with you, right? And so what I mean by that is I'm going to give you a test project or something like that to work on, and I have the boundaries for exactly what I want that to look like. I'll pay you for your time in order to do that, but I really want to see how you think, and can you actually do the thing that I'm asking you to do? Because if you can't, I'm not going to bring you on my team, right? So
yeah,
doing a test project is super important, I think, as well, as part of that process.
yeah.
Yeah, too
Definitely.
too often people just hire somebody to fogs a mirror and says, "You got a pulse? Great, let's go." So
Right.
don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the best way? Is the website the best entry point to get in touch with you and start working with you guys?
Yeah, so we got letsgrowcoo.com. But the best way for your audience is just go through, book a free 30-minute strategy call with us. Like I said, it's free.
Okay.
During that process, what I do and my team will do is we go through, what are your goals? What are you looking to do over the next 12 months? And then we do what we have we actually work with Simple CFO, who's one of our, you talked about partnering up COOs and CFOs. So
Yeah.
Simple CFO is one of the companies that we work with a lot for our clients. we created a net profit modeling spreadsheet that we go through with everybody. And what it does is says, okay, you want to make $100,000 net after taxes. Okay, great. Here's all the things you got to do based on that profit first methodology. It'll tell you exactly, here's all the KPIs you need to hit. Here's the marketing budget that you have to have based on what your average cost per lead is and that your market, all that kind of stuff. And then we kind of give you a game plan for kind of next steps moving forward, which you might want to consider. And if it's a great fit, great. If not, hey, at least, now that, you've got another resource to reach out to, just like you guys. If anything comes up, you can reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way we can.
I actually had David in mind when I asked that COO, CFO question.
David's amazing. David Richter's awesome. So
yeah, speaking of books, David's book, Profit First.
Profit First for Real Estate Investors. Yeah.
That's a good one too. Like especially if you're, I think especially if you're in the beginning stages of organizing your business, because it just gives some some of those things where you read it and you go, oh duh, but you didn't think of it yourself. You know what I mean? So
it's so easy to set up. It's just every
easy.
deal that you do, just take a portion of it and put it each one of your little buckets that you've got. And that's something else for the newbies. One of the best banks to get set up with that profit first methodology is Relay. It's one of the newer banks that's out there these days. And the cool thing about Relay is actually when you sign up with them, you can send free wire transfers, which is obviously important for real estate because normally it's like $30 for a wire transfer. So it's just one of the little perks, and it's free. Like you don't have to pay anything like you do with like Bank of America or anything like that too. So but just all these little tips and tricks. Happy to kind of give out.
All right. Well, we'll in the episode description, I'll put we'll put links to as much as we can, right? We'll put links to that free consultation with your team, and hopefully drop some links to you mentioned 2 or 3 books, so we'll try to drop links to those as well. Maybe maybe even a link to Relay, so everybody's got the follow up on that, and then and we'll also put a link, as we mentioned, community. We relaunched our Facebook community at Launch Control. It's called the Investors Hub REI on Facebook. So it's an example of one of those places that you can come connect with us, connect with other investors, and get solutions like Let's Grow COO if you need to add some structure and organization to your company.
Awesome. Yeah. And then if you guys want to reach out to us, just go to dealnation.letsgrowcoo.com and you can book your free strategy call there, and we'll be happy to work with you.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate you taking the time. And this would be, everybody is listening, please take advantage of that consultation. It's obviously, having listened to this, worth your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.